that brief conversation, I'm like,
Right.
and listening to what you guys did, really kind of like the light went off in my head. I'm like,
Okay.
we could really use your services,
Okay.
or at least your guidance, right?
Okay.
I mean, because we're in no position to really
Okay.
hire anybody at this point, but we're looking for, what do you recommend next steps be? How do we get, I mean, you kind of see what we have in a
Mhm.
high level overview. How do we get there?
Yeah,
Because we're,
okay.
I think the brain trust is pretty well spent at this point.
Sure.
Is that a good, I mean, I know
Well,
it's
no,
pretty-
no, I see that is accurate. It's like, okay, well, we want under this detox and, when
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
this treatment, and
Okay.
Southeast has, been interested, and then we want to have, recovery, but we don't know how to actually do that.
Okay, all right. Okay, well, that helps me. So, I would say, take anything I say with a grain of salt, because I'm one person kind of sharing my thoughts and experiences, having worked in this system my entire career, but I'm just one person. So if I present an idea that feels counter to what you're trying to do, please just let it roll right off the bat. So I thought I'd first say, I really commend all of you for taking on something like this and putting a lot of time and energy into making a difference, because I would say that is hard work and often thankless work, but very inspiring work, right?
Right.
And so, I'll give you 2 minutes about me, other than what maybe Kayla and Nancy have shared. So I'm a social worker by trade 3 times over. My bachelor's, master's, and PhD are all in social work. And my specialty has always been in addiction and recovery. So for the first 13 years of my career, I worked at a place called Amethyst, which is located downtown, and that's how I knew Don Strasser.
Okay.
My former CEO, Jenny O'Keefe,
I know
was,
Jenny well.
okay, so I came in as a student and then never left. I'm like that guy in Office Space, like the state, like they just started paying me and I never left,
She was with Carolyn and.
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So I was there for 13 years, and my official title was Director of Research and Grants Administration. So my job was really about dollars in the door, developing the program, evaluating it, and then of course it's a nonprofit, also running groups, engaging people, unplugging toilets, whatever needs to happen. So I did quite a few groups and individual. My specialty is really around relapse, and so that's where I cut my teeth. The past 5 years, I've had my own company, and that's how I've had the pleasure of knowing Kale. My husband and Kale have worked together in the world of technology and computers. But my husband personally always felt a real connection to the work that I did because it was meaningful, and thought about that. So they formed a natural friendship over some common interests in life. And so that's how it's been nice to come here today. So we started our company 5 years ago specifically to work with nonprofits. We knew that there was a gap in terms of so many organizations have to invest most of their dollars in clinical services, which is what you're getting reimbursed to do. So, you put a lot of energy into your counselors, your case managers, your frontline people. And then there's like 2 people in administration who are trying to handle everything, right? They're the fiscal person, and they're the operations person, and they're the guy who makes sure the van's in order, and they're the CEO. So there's a real gap, if you will, in what I would call like mid-level management or executive level work, just because organizations maybe don't have the right person to fill a lot of buckets. And so we end up filling that gap. So at our company, Mighty Crow, we do a lot of either grant writing for folks. I do a lot of evaluation because everything's required, to have data, that type of thing. I write reports or articles, white papers, that type of stuff for folks. We'll help people get a program off the ground if they say, well, we have an idea, but we need someone to manage it because we're all busy working 80 hours a week. You all know this is preaching to the choir. So we've done that. We do a lot of conference planning as well. It's just kind of weird what gets brought our way, doing a lot of continuing education. And then we build websites for people as well, because a lot of nonprofits, that's a weak spot for them too, is they've done their best to have volunteers come in and put together what we call the Frankenstein site, right? Like this volunteer could put 8 hours into it, and then they got busy, and another volunteer built this piece. And now that websites are meant to actually do something and not just really be like a series of pictures, they need to be much stronger. And we can do that at a very cost-effective rate because we know the nonprofit world, So we really structure our business around that. So currently, some of my clients I work with Franklin County Children's Services, I work with Franklin County Homeland Security and Office of Justice Programs, which just recently split. Homeland Security is its own office and Justice Programs is its own office. And I work with them on a federal grant that they have to do really kind of treatment readiness with women in Franklin County Jail. So everybody's really diagnosed, everybody's drug addicted, trying to help, and it's typically women who've been in jail multiple times, help them begin to think about not returning. And so I evaluate that for them and work with the staff, do some mentorship with the staff around, dealing with drug addiction. I work with a treatment center up in Toledo called Zeph Center. They're a lot like Southeast. They're gigantic and they do everything. Spending a lot of time with their staff around what does good group therapy look like, because group counseling was what I did the most of, and what do quality services look like, and then I also do grant writing for them. Work with a really neat program in Youngstown called Flying High. They're a lot like you all. They do just about everything in the part of town that nobody wants to be in. Kale, I'll let you see that because we just redid their website, and I'll share more about Flying High. But I worked with them and we got a $4 million Department of Labor grant, and so I evaluate that for them and work closely with the director there. The Department of Labor grant, by the way, allowed him to build a welding school from the ground up. And he serves people who are coming out of prison or jail who are drug addicted, so your people. And works very hard to help them become employable by putting them through a skilled trade. And then he has a professional development school for nursing. So we do nursing and welding, which very, very different, but you'd be surprised. They're great fields to be in, both of those.
Great range.
Yeah. And then I work locally with the Breathing Association. I do tobacco dependence treatment with them. Work with the House of Hope, which you may be familiar with, and to do fund seeking for them. And just we have kind of more clients from there, but you get the idea. We kind of work anywhere and everywhere with people. I met Nancy through my work with our Franklin County coroner. Back in 2016, Homeland Security asked me to work with our coroner to develop the first community action plan and be a part of the first summit that we had. So I did that and came on, helped with the summit, helped do the call to action, start to get some talking points, and then helped with the facilitated discussions that led to the writing of that plan, the production of the plan, and then I co-chaired the recovery subcommittee. So most of my professional work has always circled around helping people find and sustain their recovery. My dissertation was focused on what does long-term recovery look like, so I talked with people who had 25, 30, 35 years, because recovery grows, it changes. And it's important to look at the milestones and how that lays out. And then my other client that you should probably know about is Ohio Recovery Housing. So people who do sober living, who've gone through the quality standards that are laid out nationally, so that you know it's not a flop house, it's a recovery house.
Amen.
And so we do a lot of work with them as well. So that's me in a nutshell. So I'll jump in. So one of the things that I thought about is just first, I think that I read the 3-page overview, and my first thought was it is so hard to describe what you're trying to do in a way that is concise and clear, especially when you have multiple things that you're trying to do. So as you're thinking about sharing your vision, because that's really the next step, is hammering out this vision. Most funders or people who are going to listen to you, their brain is going to want to hear a story like this. That you need to answer these questions. Who? Who are you serving? Be very detailed about that. What? What are you doing specifically, clearly? Where? Where are you doing it? So who, what, where? How do you plan to do it? When do you want to see things happen? And why? So who, what, where, when, why, and how. Those are the key questions. And when I write grants or I write proposals or anything, I read back through my writing and I try to say to myself, did I make that very clear? And sometimes when I actually write a document, that's how I write it. I'll write the word who, and I'll put it there because I want the reader to be very clear with what I'm trying to communicate. So I think for you all, if you are, you may need to develop a couple of documents. One might be something that you want to share with funders around what you need, right? So here's who we serve, here's who we are, here's what we do, here's why we do it, here's how we do it, here's when we do it, and here's exactly, you know, the reasoning behind it. And the other big what question, what do you need? So a budget is very, very helpful, because someone who gets interested, their first natural question is going to be, how much do you need? And you want to have a ballpark. And you can say, hey, rough guess, ballpark, these are what our costs are going to be. So they can at least start thinking about it, or they introduce you to the next person who may be the one that, hello, that,
It's Joey.
oh,
Joey
yeah,
Gretchen,
you
Gretchen
made it.
Joey.
Yes, I made it.
Yeah.
Joey had the twins and has the eye injury.
No, Joey's
Joey.
got eye injury.
Who's
Oh, okay, Joey's the eye injury.
Yes.
I've heard all about it. How are you?
I'm good.
And you're still,
Yes, I
you're
just-
still gonna get a hug. Good for you.
A stinky hug.
Yeah.
Stinky one.
Yeah.
We still love you, Joey.
Virtual hug.
Yes, yes.
Fist bump.
Yeah.
If you want to eat, please do so. There.
Oh, no, I'm good, thank you.
Wow. Anybody else need a cold water?
Thank you.
Okay.
So there's the document that you kind of put out there to people that you think you might need time, talent, or treasure from, right? And then there's your communication document where you're just trying to educate people on what you do. And again, you're still answering the who, what, where, when, and why, but it can be more comprehensive because you're not necessarily asking them for something versus a funder. So I wrote notes on some things here. I thought I'd start by talking about Franklin County in general. Do you think that would be helpful for just a second?
Sure, please.
Okay, so in our county, we're seen as having a lot of resources. But what's interesting is those resources tend to be clustered in certain areas. And we know that this area in particular is really resource deprived in terms of the investment from the county. So if you were to think of a map and you were to zip code our county, and you were to overlay overdose deaths and those types of things, and then you were to take and lay out where the treatment centers are, you'd see that this corridor of zip codes, right, you know, this one, the one next to it, the one just a little bit south, have a overexposure, if you will, in terms of overdose rates. If you were to look at the closest treatment center, you don't see any markers, you know. Really, House of Hope outpatient is probably your closest, okay?
Which did you seem the closest?
House of Hope's outpatient program is on Harrisburg
Yeah.
Pike.
Yeah.
But that's pretty close to like where
Yeah.
Mound is, you know, so not walking distance, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
but that's your closest. The other weird thing about kind of the interpretation of Franklin County and what we have is people go, well, aren't there like 40-some providers in the ADAM network, and ADAM is the Alcohol, Drug, and Mental Health Board of the county? And the answer is yes. But when you break down, well, what do they provide, what you'll find is it's a lot of outpatient treatment, which is valuable, but that's a level of care that only a few people meet. So in good alcohol and drug treatment, a counselor should sit down and do a full-blown assessment with somebody. And following national criteria, it should tell you what level of care they need, just like a hospital would triage you. And so levels of care include things like residential, partial hospitalization, intensive outpatient, outpatient, detox, okay? And really, you put me in that based on my severity. So if I've been drug addicted for 20 years, my life is fairly chaotic, I might also have some mental health concerns, and maybe I don't really have a safe place to go, I should be in the highest level of care, which is residential. What do we have the least of in this county? Residential. And a lot of that is because it's capped at the state level of 16 beds, if you've heard that before, you can only have 16 beds. And if you run detox, that number of beds conflicts with your residential beds. So if I want to have 5 detox beds, then I can only have 11 residential beds if I'm in the same building. Well, why is that? It's because in the 1970s, when we deinstitutionalized the mental hospitals, there was a rule that went into effect called the IMD rule, the Institute of Mental Disorders rule. And it was to prevent people from creating mental institutions again. And they slapped that rule on alcohol and drug treatment, which should have never happened. The good news is we're hearing chatter at the state and federal level, because we've been advocating for years, that that rule will lift. And a lot of it has to do with this crisis. This is why every place is full. They're not allowed to grow. They haven't been allowed. They're capped at the number that they can serve. So unless they want to open up an entirely new facility, they can't grow their numbers. So that's what's always interesting when you look at maybe the number of treatment centers we have. You have to dig a little deeper. We have almost no partial hospitalization, which is often what people need, where they're there for maybe 6 hours a day and then they can go home, or it's a shorter duration. We have almost none of that in the county. What we have is the cheapest, outpatient, where I just come a couple of hours a week to group, maybe one individual session, maybe a half-hour case management, and I'm kind of off on my own. And that works if, again, you don't have a very severe addiction, you've got a safe and stable place to live, and often you have loving supports around you. That's not who we're seeing anymore.
Right.
And that's
So-
not our clientele.
That's not our Friday night crowd.
No, it was never any of my clients. So I think that that level of care was designed for a very different, well, it was designed for an alcoholic who had someone who loved them, who wasn't an alcoholic, who took care of them. This would be my grandfather, my uncle,
Yeah.
all of my cousins, you know what I mean? Who had someone who made sure they had 3 squares a day, had clean clothes. Okay, those, I don't know where those people are anymore.
They died in the 80s.
Right, they're hard to find, and if you find one, bronze them, because they're very rare, you know? It's just, that's not who you see anymore. So that's why when you think about why can't anybody get into treatment, treatment is just, and my entire career, all we faced were cuts. Every year we got a cut, and we were asked to do more and more with less and less. We had to get creative, how we brought dollars in the door, and all this kind of stuff. Your brother would relate to this. With how Buckeye was, we were just asked to do more and more with less and less. Okay, so then this tidal wave of the opiate addiction hits, and all we've done has been chop, 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 and now we're supposed to address the surge. And so that's why we're seeing such an issue, so all those things. I say all that to say in this county, if you want to be recognized as a provider of services, there are some things that you're supposed to do. And some of this is just related to language. In this proposal, the word detox shows up. That's a licensed treatment service. And so if you're saying you're doing detox, you really need to run that through a certification. And if you do detox, you have to have medical staff on board, and there's a ratio, and there's a certain number of hours, and there's things, and there's 2 categories of detox. Subacute, which is like your hospitalized type of detox, or ambulatory. And ambulatory means I'm probably at your facility 6 hours a day, but I can ambulate. I can go home and someone will administer medications and all of that. But there are staffing ratios and all of these requirements. And so if what you're thinking more is how do we help people stabilize while they wait to get into treatment, that's not a licensed service.
So we should replace the word detox
Well,
with
I
stabilization.
would encourage you to really think about what does that look like to you all. When you're saying that, what does it physically look like? And that was something I struggled with here, is I really couldn't exactly figure out what you meant by some of the things that I couldn't work off of an assumption.
Right.
You know, when I heard that, I thought, wonder what they mean. What does that really look like? Like, are people puking in the back room? Like, because that's how I know detox, right?
Right.
And are we administering IVs because people dehydrate when they detox? Or are we talking about trying to help people just stabilize and hold it together while they're waiting a treatment slot? And so I just encourage you to kind of think through, what does that look like? Another thing that you might want to consider is when you talk about a faith-based approach, I believe that faith-based people assume that other faith-based people know what they mean when they say faith-based approach. And I will tell you, you are incorrect. So define that. What do you mean by a faith-based approach? Because if you're not familiar with faith-based work, you're going to think, you're sitting and reading the Bible all day? Well, that's interesting, but how is that going to help them? So, and again, don't let people assume, okay? So you'll want to define that. What does your faith-based approach look like? What do you mean exactly by that? So I would put some language around that. I would describe it. Because again, I think that there are people, and then also words that you don't want to use. No one else, never, or none, because you're probably incorrect. So for example, there is an organization doing something very similar to what you're doing on a very small scale called Como Recovery. You familiar with Como Recovery? COMO. They're on Como in Clintonville. So I live in Clintonville, and on Como Avenue, they have a church. It's a couple in recovery, and they have a house, and they only take in 3 women at a time. It's a year-long program. Sounds very similar to what I believe to be your training module, as much as I could tell. A lot of companionship, a lot of mentorship, all of that tied into the church. The church supports these ladies as they're going through, that kind of thing. So when we say things like nobody, someone's going to step up and be like, that's not true. So what you want to talk about is limited, right? Things are limited. They are scarce. They are few and far between or things like that. And I think the more you can do to describe the West Side, the better. Because guaranteed that a lot of the folks that make decisions do not live over here.
And they don't drive through here either.
Right.
No, I haven't been this far down Broad Street since my dissertation. My dissertation got bound at the bookbinders here on West Broad. That's in the little plaza just before. Yeah, that's the last, and that was in 2011. So that's the last time I've driven this far down West Broad.
Wow.
Because I usually go to ODOT for or Department of Public Safety for a conference or training. I used to live way out east in Pickerington. You know what I mean? Like I drove through the Near East Side, but never came over here. So I don't think people get, like when I was driving to here, I was trying to be mindful of what I was seeing, right? What is it like over here? And who was I seeing? I saw a lot of people on the street, like more than I even thought I might see.
Really?
Yeah, and it just, like that, and just so much of the empty buildings, just all of that.
Light.
Yeah, and but at the same time, I saw a lot of beautiful homes. So it's very eclectic over here, and I think that there's a lot of culture. So
Amen.
the more you can describe
Amen.
who you're seeing, what their needs are, and why those needs aren't being met, the better. Because you got to make a statement of need rather than a problem. You want to call it the statement of need.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. And I would say too, and I'll send you, so this is how I do things, guys. I write all over stuff. So I'll send you my edits in a way that you can read them.
That's
That-
perfect.
Because this looks
Wonderful.
like
Yes.
hieroglyphic work right now. I don't know that you could read
Well,
any
I
of
don't
this.
want you to drop a lot of time into this, Gretchen. I mean, if you want to just make copies of that, I'll pick them up when I go see Jake. I mean,
I gotta translate this for you. It's
okay.
like,
I
again,
appreciate it. I mean, I just don't want to.
it's hieroglyphics and all that. No, that's okay. It's all right. And I think too, be cognizant of the systems that you're kind of dabbling in. So you work with homeless people, and we have a huge homelessness system. Jim knows how that game works. We've got the behavioral health system, of course, so around treatment and services and prevention. And then you're also kind of dabbling in the recovery housing system. And I think that at least 2 of those systems can be allies in your work. Recovery housing providers are very, very friendly. They are usually people in recovery who started out of the goodness of their heart. They know what it's like to be scrappy and to be grassroots, and they're not used to having dollars. I think they're your first truest ally. And then I think the treatment system potentially could be an ally because it's so overburdened right now, and you've built inroads with people, and that's the key. You've made some strides to kind of say, hey, here's who we are. We'd like you to start looking at us. We'd like you to start funding us. That's the way that I think about it. And then I think the least friendly system we have here is the homelessness system. The Community Shelter Board is notoriously known for not being the friendliest group to work with. That's the best way I can describe it. However, that doesn't mean that it's always going to be that way, or that you should not try and have some inroads with them, because they're used to, when you were talking about the ground for the tiny houses and people are, well, they're used to that. So they're great allies in knowing, like, well, what are your legal rights around federal fair housing and all the kind of things. So they can be a natural ally. And what I would say, as someone who's worked in the system for a long time, the more inroads and relationships you can build, the better, because this system gets really, really weird about anybody that they see as an outsider or a disruptor. I don't know if you've picked up on that, right? But folks who kind of come in and want to change things or want to do things, a lot of the existing providers and the officials don't respond to innovation like other industries would. Like, wow, you've got a great idea. Well, let's do it. They're like, what?
Yeah.
What do you
Right.
want? Who are you? What are you doing?
Yeah.
Criticizing what
Yes.
I've done all these
Yes,
years.
oh, so you're saying I've been doing it wrong, well, I've been breaking my back, you know, and it just comes from being beat down, I think, for so long.
Right,
You
sure.
know, you build that, but, so the more relationships you can build and get to know people, because what you're doing is needed, and I don't think anyone will argue with that, especially on the west side. There is data to support that.
Where
And,
do you get those data?
from me, I'll give it to you.
I love you,
From where?
I'm just telling you.
I have it. I have it.
Very good.
And you have it too,
Mhm.
in some of the presentations that the coroner's done. So we've got data that we can pull. So we have that, and we can make that case. Let me see here. Oh, for like, okay, so when people hear the word training or curriculum in these fields, they're going to ask right away, what's the evidence base for your curriculum and your training? So be prepared to talk about the foundations of it, like why do you think it will work? You know, what principles is it based on? And how are those principles connected to what we know from the science helps people stay sober? So you have to draw those connections for people. So for example, you're talking heavily about relationships, right, and mentorship. Well, when you look at a list of protective factors and risk factors, in protective factors, it lists all that kind of stuff. So that help people stay sober, meaningful relationships, meaningful connections. When you teach people new things, that's actually a protective factor, teaching them to take risks, healthy risks, right? Like go to a meeting, share your story, or be of service. Okay, those are risks that people take. And that actually builds strength towards recovery. So as you look, and again, I don't know your curriculum well enough, but as you think about all the stuff you're trying to do with your training, match it up against the best that you have in terms of knowledge about recovery. And really, you can pull a lot of that from SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, so samhsa.gov. You could pull that down, pull down information on risk and protective factors, the definition of recovery. So SAMHSA's definition of recovery says that a person needs 4 things. Health, so good health, right? The ability to take care of yourself. Home, a safe and stable place to live. Community, others around them, a place to be, and purpose.
Yeah.
And those are the 4, this is from this is the federal definition from 2010. Those are the 4 pillars. And so when I write grants, I use language that already exists, and I make it clear how my program creates or provides those 4 pillars. Now, inside of that definition, they'll say that there are 10 things that support those 4 domains. And you're going to probably find that out of those 10, my guess, just ballpark, you're hitting 8 of them.
Wow.
And the other 2, you're probably like, I can add that.
Right.
You know, so take a look at that, and I have that all written up. So again, I can just, it's easy. I will just add it to an email and share that with you, because it's not proprietary. I just cut and paste it from the government, you know, put it on the document. So you can see that that's public information. And so what it does is it helps, as you guys are talking to, you know, if you ever get an audience with Royer, you know, which I seriously doubt, but you know, if that ever happens.
Only in passing.
Right,
I do
right.
get to talk to him in passing.
Yeah. But anybody like him or Columbus Foundation or some of these others, they appeal to like the kind of the going science or the going evidence. And so when you're able to say, okay, we already know this, and then here's what we're doing, and here's how it matches, then they listen. Because their question is always going to be about outcomes. What are you expecting people to achieve? And when you think about outcomes, you always want to tie that back to, if I say people are going to enter sobriety and sustain their recovery, I'm always saying to myself, as measured by what? Right? Or as evidenced by what? And you got to wheel your way back into your program and say, oh, I'm going to do it by the number of meetings that they attend, or, you know, clean urine, or whatever it is that matters to you. You just have a tie back, because that's what they care about. Funders care, like, how do I know that my money was used as intended?
So key performance indicators, I mean,
Yeah.
basically is what you're talking about?
That's exactly it. From the business world, yes, your KPI,
Okay.
for sure. And again, there are a lot of national measures. SAMHSA has the NOMS, NOMS, national outcome measures, and that's what I build databases for people to collect outcomes because I think it doesn't have to be that complicated, so I uncomplicate it for people and build it out. So the NOMs are really easy to kind of use as a starting point because most of the folks doing treatment and recovery are familiar with those. So it's like, just make your life easy. It's what they're gonna ask about anyway. So, use what they're familiar with.
Use their reference points.
Yes, it makes them more comfortable. And, the relationships with the systems, talking about your population, thinking about your partners too. They always want to know, well, who are you gonna collaborate with? Collaboration. And what I would say is, don't ever list a partner who doesn't know they're a partner.
Right.
Because then it can get ugly. They're like, well, we never signed anything with them, and that's just, a moment that you don't want to have. So I would, you can talk about people that you think are gonna be natural connects in the community, so, we know that we provide something that, and we hope to set up. But if there are people that you think would be referral partners for you to refer to, or them to refer to you, or resource partners, meaning, they do a pantry and they always have extra food and they're willing to give that to us, or they tend to provide this, so instead of us replicating it, where they're gonna come in and do this for us and we're gonna do that for them. So they always wanna know, who are you connecting with, who are you collaborating with, what's that gonna look like? Because again, I think that shows you're not functioning on an island on your own. And that seems to be something that people don't want. They don't want, well, why aren't you talking to so-and-so, and why aren't you working with these people, or they're doing this? And then be okay with identifying what you think the gaps are. Spell those out from the experiences you're having with the people you've been serving. So if people are saying, I'm calling to get help, and they're telling me it's 6 weeks, you can put some of that down. Or I'm finding that they'll get in, but then they have nowhere to go, to your point. What happens next? And so they're cycling right back in. It's good to tell those stories. But call out those gaps. And then if you think you're gonna fill a gap, make that very clear. So the gap that we're gonna fill is the time that they exit treatment, we're gonna pick them up, they're gonna stay with us at our stabilization center until they can, whether it's get into recovery housing, or secure, safe, and stable housing with a family member, anything like that, where you're saying, this is the niche that we're coming in to fill. I think that's hard for anybody to argue with. When you say, look, it's a real gap, and we think we can fill it. That's the kind of stuff that makes people sit up and pay attention. So I think your next steps are to really think through specifically the way you want to describe who you serve, what you do, where you're doing it, when, the who, what, where, when, why, and hows, again. And just as you're going through that, think, did we really describe who we serve and who we are? Because that's two who's, right? Did I really describe what we do precisely so that people don't question it? You want them to be able to walk away, like elevator speech, right? Walk away and know, oh, they're going to do this, this, and this. I mean, and it really, if we can uncomplicate it and give them kind of 3 key takeaways, that's all anybody can ever remember.